The following is a conversation with Kyal Grant, a Queensland hunter, deep thinker, and a man who has an interesting way of motivating himself towards becoming a better hunter that I think you might be interested in. During this conversation, we talk about the value of an animal's life from a hunter's perspective as well as from a community perspective and how those metrics are always changing. We talk about the objective truth in hunting and what may be right for you but not potentially right for someone else. We also touch on Kyle's interesting way that he views self-development and self-growth and motivation, using negative self-talk to propel himself forward. And finally, Kyle also brought up a video that a controversial video that I published and then 5 minutes later took down. He saw it, had some interesting thoughts. We dive into it. It's awkward, it's uncomfortable, it's fantastic. There's a lot to be learned from it. I encourage you to check it out. I will say at one point in this video, there is a little bit of background noise in Kyle's recording. That's just because he's a new father. He has a young family. There's some cooking happening in the background, life happening in the background. I encourage you, just push through. The sound goes away and gets back to normal. It's definitely worth listening to. And lastly, so much of what we talk about revolves around community and personal growth and development. And if you're interested in those things, as well as connecting with other hunters, potentially winning a free guided hunt or going on a hunt with other members, check out the Australian Hunters Club, australianhunters.com.au. It's a fantastic way to support this podcast, support what I'm doing, as well as support yourself. Anyway, without further ado, onto the conversation with Kyal. Kyal, I wanted to start with a poem. It's called Death of a Deer by Nicola Lablis that was written in 1954, and it goes like this. I followed my father uphill through the fir trees, and hideous branches are hurting my skin. Today we'll be hunting, a deer will be hunting, the hunt of starvation and sorrow and sin. I'm thirsty, my father commands me, be quiet. How limpid, O water, you're quivering by. By thirst I feel bound to the innocent creature that, laws notwithstanding, is going to die. She sprang into sight at the end of her leaping and peered all around her and listened for sound. With delicate nostrils she touches the water and silvery circles start gliding around. The moonlight reflected with cherry tree blossoms, her fairy-like presence a radiant spot. If only my father's old rifle misfired, if only he'd bungled and blundered the shot. But there was thunder. She knelt on the pebbles, she gazed at the stars for a final adieu, and fell in the water with blood rushing downstream, a last invitation to places she knew. I stumbly shambled and shut down her eyelids, on eyes whence forever her life would retreat. I startled and staggered when father with gladness and joy in his voice uttered, now we have fresh meat. I'm thirsty, my father allows me to drink now. How turbid, O water, you seem to subside. By thirst I feel bound to the innocent creature that, laws notwithstanding, has already died. But laws have lost their relevance and core. When life is not given anymore, traditions and compassion, worthless foam. Where sisters lie ill and dying back at home. My hand is feeling something in the weeds. A little bell in my mind just barely heeds. Now from the grill my father sets aside the roasted kidneys and the doe's dear heart. And what's a heart? I wish to, just living would be fine. Oh maiden, please forgive me, you dearest dear of mine. I'm drowsy. Oh, the darkness. The flames are flying, fleeting. What is my father thinking? I'm sobbing and I'm eating. The first question I have for you, Kyal, is can we have our ethics and eat them too? What do you think?
It's an interesting one. So I know that modern society would like us to believe that, I guess, we shouldn't. We at least shouldn't enjoy the kill, and in doing so, we should try and take a somewhat moral and ethical path that's superior.
Yeah.
And I guess it's a burden that we have for possessing cognizance, but I don't know. I think that the more and more we're honest with ourselves at a far deeper level, I think it's almost natural for a man to desire that, if that makes sense.
Man and woman, or man?
Man and woman, of course.
Okay. That's okay. I'm happy to clarify.
Yeah, it's 2022. You've got to be very, very careful.
especially as hunters. Look, I think you're very true, and there is a burden to bear, and I think that poem actually does a fantastic job of kind of highlighting the reluctance to that burden, and yet situation and circumstance which demands it. Like the poem's alluding to the fact that times are hard, and there's a sister that's dying at home. They need to feed, they need food, and yet this person is struggling with the hunt. They're struggling with the ethics, the choices that they have to make, or even that they're separate, one step separated from with their father taking the shot. And at the end, I love it because there's this beautiful kind of summary in that there is the death, and there is the sadness, and there is the weeping, and then there is the questioning, and yet, like, I don't know about you, but when I hear that roasted kidneys and the heart, like, it's the way that it's written, almost it's like this the taste buds, like it's like, oh, there's something wholesome, there's something about that it's something primal and connected and communal, and it's not just for you, it's for your sister who's dying, and but that justification is so strong in the the sphere outside of hunters, the non-hunters in the world, but it's even strong even within hunters. And recently, I've had a conversation with people who question whether it's okay to be okay with killing, whether it is a burden. What do you think? Do you think when you said that it's a burden, and you said it's a burden of being conscious, break that down for me. What does that mean? What does that look like in application?
So if we have a look at every single other animal that's on this planet, everything has a tendency to... No, I won't say everything because, of course, not everything is carnivorous.
2023.
Exactly. Be very, very careful with what you say when it's in recorded form, because you can be held to it. So I guess because an animal doesn't possess the same level or that heightened level of cognizance as what we have a moral and ethical obligation to make sure that we're using our powers for good, if that makes sense. So obviously we have access to technology, we have access to firearms, we've commercialised hunting, we've done all of these things that really tip the scales in our favour. I mean, even if you take it right back to a very base level when you say the inclusion of firearms, we've really stacked the deck in our favour, as much as we would like to say that it's really hard, and it is hard hunting, say, deer, for instance, in really tough country. We still have the deck stacked in our favour. I get to go back and sleep in my swag. I get to go and enjoy the luxurious benefit of fire, even. I get all of these things that make it easier for me. Therefore, the taking of that life, I feel like there's a greater importance placed on an appreciation for the taking of that life that's made possible by the burden of cognizance.
So, let me play devil's advocate, because I love to, even though I agree with like 99% of what you say.
Go for it.
Because it makes interesting conversation, and we're here to learn, and we're here to grow and expand our minds and our lives. Couldn't you just argue that the fire and the swag and the sealed food that you can then reheat, like all of these luxuries, are really just humans being really good at adapting our environment, that there's nothing special or separate from that and nature, just that we've mastered nature to the point where like a deer, when it goes and it makes its bed, that could seem luxurious, like a deer's bed, to an animal that sleeps in the snow, but like just sitting on the snow. But to the animal, it's just like, no, this is just what I do. Like, I'm just smart enough, and I've learned enough over, however many million years ago, that if I do this, it increases my rate of survival, my fitness, my ability to reproduce. Isn't that just humans just doing that? Or is it deeper? Is there something deeper about that?
No, I think it speaks more to our level of innate intellect and our ability to advance in an evolutionary sense far and above everything that we're competing with in this ecosystem. So as much as you say that might be luxurious to that deer, 100,000 years from now, when a deer is running around with Kevlar vests and rifles and he's, suddenly achieved that same level of evolutionary benefit that we've got.
Yeah.
I I guess if you extend the timeline far enough, I'm not saying that the outcome would be equitable and that they would achieve the same or even desire the same kind of outcome as to where we are. But I feel like because we've achieved such a higher plane of intelligence and we carry this burden of looking after, at least we'd hope to carry this burden of looking after our ecosystems, our environment, our entire planet as a whole, that we also need to bear that burden of understanding the value of a life that's been taken, but also accepting the fact that it's okay and it's incredibly natural to take that life.
That's fascinating, because what you're talking about for some people, I mean, you're presenting it in one sphere, one kind of idea, one cohesive thought. But for a lot of people, they're two very different things. What is natural and what is ethical can sometimes be different things. And your position, that at least the one I'm hearing, is because we have this elevated evolutionary state, we have a responsibility and a burden to manage, look after everything else to ensure that it can evolve, and that is the root or the burden of the ethics that sit behind it, which is fascinating because, like, that's, most people would go to some sort of philosophical or moral position about, like, good and evil, right and wrong. But you're just saying we're just in a really privileged position, and so the right thing to do is that we should look after things, not because some higher power gave us that responsibility, not because there's some ethical imperative, but just because we can. We are empowered to do so, and we should. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, but I also think that things can be both right and wrong at the same point in time. So. And I guess this is where this is where that ambiguity comes into play, where you say that some people, and we'll make a fair argument that, it's not ethical then to take that life because we have this higher level of consciousness and intelligence that we should be able to find other solutions. I think that can be true, but also can be removed of an underlying objective truth. And I know you and I have spoke about this in the past, about this notion of objective truth, and we don't have to go too far into the weeds here right now. But I guess for me, the objective truth would be a natural biological underpinning fact. And that is that life is certain as death is certain. And that's cross-species. So that doesn't change. But because we possess the tools to be able to understand and process these concepts, that we then have an obligation to not remove ourselves from those processes, but to undertake those processes with conscientious consideration. Is probably a decent way of saying it. How's it?
So conscientious. I can't even say the word conscientious. You say the first word, and I'll say the second word. Consideration.
Yeah, conscientious.
I can't even say it. Oh my god! Yeah. So which is sounds like another word for fair chase or fair game. Like it's like you engage in this system, but do so fairly. So I'm keen. Well, no, correct me.
Well, can I push?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, can I push back on that for a second? Because I don't know that you could make an objective argument that it is fair. Because as we just spoke about to start with, the deck is well and truly stacked in our favour. So let's take, for instance, like I spoke before about technology. I can drive to that state forest and go and hunt that deer.
Yeah.
That deer is restricted by the amount of miles that it can travel under its own power in a day. Like I can go and hunt the state forest in Tenterfield, New South Wales, go and hunt over towards Sydney, and then I can drive back up and hunt on property in Kilcoy area in southeast Queensland, all in the space of, realistically, if I wanted to do it in a week.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to say objectively that we're hunting fairly. I don't believe we are, but I think we also need to accept that can be okay, so long as it's done with proper consideration.
Okay, so you're saying there's an extra layer, that consideration sits on top of fair chase, and you kind of make a decision where you believe, what is fair and what is not, and then even within that framework, you still need to consider. So let's dig into those augments, those augmentations that you're talking about in terms of driving to multiple state forests within a week. What Because I find this fascinating. The lengths that people go to augment their abilities to get deer, to get pigs, to get goats, whatever their target animal, their target species is. For you, what is fair for you personally? Is a rifle fair? Is a bow fair? Is a semi-automatic fair? Is a game camera fair? Is a thermal fair? Is a trap and a feeder fair? Is a game caller fair? Is camouflage fair? Like, I could keep
Okay,
going.
so this is where it comes down to, I guess, your own moral compass. So for me, for instance, I currently hunt, and look, I should preface this with saying that bow hunting is something that I'm hoping to explore in the next 12 months, and I'm equally obsessive about that too. But at the moment, I hunt open sight rifles and vintage World War One, World War Two rifles, right? Because I like the challenge. So for me, fairness is in feeling like I've deserved the spoils of my hard work. That for me is fair. Doesn't mean that it was a fair and equitable conflict between me and that deer. Although I don't even know if conflict's the right way of
No, I know what you mean.
But an exchange between me and the deer.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me, the value or the fairness comes down to the expectation that I place upon myself.
That's fascinating. That's really interesting because I'm not sure most people think. I mean, I think most people understand what you've just said, but most people don't think about it like that. They think about the exchange, and they have some sort of kind of baseline of like whatever they think is fair, and then you can kind of build on top of it as kind of, or you can build up to it. Maybe is a better way to look at it. And so, for instance, I think I would be speaking for most hunters, and this is like you said, dangerous thing to do when you're recorded. But hey, like I'm not, actually no, I'm going to retract that. I'm not going to speak for most hunters. What I think most hunters feel is fair is hunting in state forest with a rifle and binoculars and wearing camouflage. I think that most hunters feel that that's fair, and it's not. And I think the reason behind that judgment has less to do with some sort of abstract musing or thought of intellectual exercise, and really comes down to how often they see the animal, how often they get to execute on the kill, and how many times they get to do that every year. I think that's the equation for it's like if I kill, it's different for everyone. And I'm not seeking, when I say I mean like person A. When I kill like 2 deer a year, I'm happy. I feel like that was fair. Um, I mean, is that how you think most people think?
I guess we're always going to be a product of the people that we surround ourselves with, right? And that's going to be a reflection of our own ideals. So what I think would be fair and what the people who I associate with would think would be fair, I guess, is going to be a little bit different, than what you might think would be fair. But I guess in an objective sense, I don't have a problem with it either. So if we're talking about a grander picture and not just my opinion, then I would think that there's nothing wrong with that. Is that fair to say?
Is it fair to talk about fairness? Well, I mean, the issue is that when a state body is trying to regulate hunting, they need to come up with some sort of framework to hold people accountable to. So whether I think it's fair or not, honestly, at the end of the day, doesn't matter. It's what either the people in the democracy think is fair, ultimately, because they're going to elect the officials, or the officials who are in power who are making the laws think is fair. So, I mean, in some ways, your personal, I mean, unless you want to be a complete maverick and go and break laws and stuff, which some people do. I mean, a lot of people do. But otherwise, your own sense of fairness has to be limited by, or at least influenced by, what the state says you can do or what the state says is fair. Especially, for instance, New South Wales, I mean, you guys really have some strict laws around what is fair and what's not fair. In Victoria, that's less so. It's a bit of a wild west out here in some regards. There's still restrictions on caliber size and types of heads on arrows and all sorts of things like that. But I like the depth that you have to go through to demonstrate that you understand what is fair when you go for your R license, for instance, is quite considerable in my mind.
So I would think that, or at least I would hope that that's a reflection of some people's input that are far smarter than you and I. So I've got quite an association with science, both through my occupation and through my wife, who's actually a scientist. So a lot of this kind of stuff. So specifically, my industry is horses, and I haven't personally, but a lot of my colleagues have done a lot of work with looking at animal welfare standards and, I guess, an objective, I don't want to say an objective truth. Maybe it's the best way of saying it. An objective truth in the right and wrong way to handle these animals. Yeah. So creating a welfare framework in which to operate within. And I should hope that those kind of inputs are reflected within New South Wales DPI. I'm not intimately familiar with New South Wales DPI or their procedures, same as Victoria. But I should hope that even if people are saying that or you say that they're quite hard and they're quite stringent requirements to stick to, I would sincerely hope that they're reflective of what's considered an ethical, we spoke about ethics before, an ethical way in which to conduct yourself while carrying out the hunting of these animals.
Yeah, no, I think they are. Like when I say that they're strong, and I've said this openly a number of times, so I'm happy to go on the record and saying it, in that I think what the New South Wales DPI is doing is fantastic. And I think the framework that they've built around hunting in New South Wales should be the gold standard for every single state. A lot of people disagree with me on that. Victorians disagree with me on that because they have this.
We don't listen to them anyway.
we in Victoria, we have this kind of mecca of hunting where there is no reporting. Any man and his dog can go out into the high country or any other state forest in the state and do kind of whatever you want. That sounds ridiculous, but in contrast to DPI, whatever you want. And I worry that it's a glass house that seems fantastic when you're on the inside, but the second that a rock is thrown, and those walls will come tumbling down. And I would rather have clear and concise frameworks that restrict within a reasonable boundary than no frameworks at all and complete freedom and then lose it.
I think everyone wants to whinge about government, about rules and about legislation, and you can talk at a governmental level or even an association level. People don't like being beholden to those rules. But at the end of the day, I guess I'm far more cynical than most in the sense that if you say you have open slather, my belief would be that it's only a matter of time before the amount of idiots who abuse that privilege start to outnumber or start to become representative of the entire industry as a whole.
Yeah.
And that's not something that I want to partake in. The reason I got into deer hunting, so I used to do a lot of shooting. I grew up shooting when I was a kid. Not so much hunting, more shooting. And I was living on a property out west of Kingaroy there. And, there's only so many times you can go out root shooting and things like that before it's, before it starts to, yeah, exactly. And it's not something that I found, I guess, going back to talking about taking a life, I didn't feel like I was living up to the burden of expectation that I had on myself, or at least that I felt like we should have on everybody by going and doing that. Sure, there's an argument to be made for the controlled culling of these animals on properties and everything like that. I have no issue with that. But me personally, I didn't like that. But when I started to get into deer hunting, and I'd go out time and time and time again, and I didn't get a bloody thing. I didn't even see one. and granted, I'm a moron and it takes me a lot of time I don't pick things up easily. So, there was a lot of failures, but it was the fact that this was all so what I would consider ethical, but also the people that I started to find myself surrounded by in deer hunting were very, very different from your average Joe Blow with a rifle and a shotgun out in the middle of nowhere. And it appealed to me. And that's not a judgment call on people who sort of live in that other realm. But for me, I didn't want to be associated with that. When I started to find deer hunting, I found a very different class of people who were more likely to be in, they were in more skilled workforces. They were more likely to be owning their own businesses, more likely to be high flyers, I guess you could say, high achievers. And those are the kind of people that I love surrounding myself with. And as a consequence, I tend to find that those people, at least in my experience, are the more ethical of the bunch. Is that fair to say?
It's your opinion. You can say what you want. I think that I'm curious about your perception around that, and I wonder if the nature of the hunt being difficult and deer being somewhat elusive or difficult to hunt in general forces a certain individual to persevere. Not forces, facilitates a certain kind of person to persevere through that. Whereas something like pig shooting, for instance, or pig dogging is a different kind of hunt because it's not as difficult. Well, I mean, I don't actually, you know what? I don't know if that's true. I've never done pig dog hunting before, so I don't know if that's true. From what I've perceived, it doesn't look as difficult, and that could be false. That could just be a false perception, but it doesn't seem to require the same level of skill and dedication. There's definitely skill in managing dogs. There's definitely skill in managing a high pressure, tense situation. There's definitely skill involved getting up to a crazy boar who is thrashing around and could split your guts open, and trying to take a pig sticker and finishing the animal cleanly. I'm sure there's a great skill in that, but it's a skill that can be practiced and managed very quickly and often, it seems, if you know where to go. Whereas with the deer, unless you're shooting, the only exception to that rule is if you're shooting on a high fence property and you're paying. And then I would even argue that you're not practicing deer hunting, you're practicing shooting, shooting an animal, because they wouldn't be hard to find. You can sneak up on them pretty easily. Sorry,
just on that, I was just thinking as you're talking about that, I was going to say that I would be hesitant to make a judgment call and say that isn't hunting. But the more I think about it, no, I think I would make that call and say that you're 100% right, that it isn't hunting. That for me, and I don't even think for me, like, what's the point in doing that if there's no challenge in it? And I guess it depends on where you put your metrics, where you put your goalposts for success. Mm-hmm. But I don't understand the drive for somebody to go and shoot just for a head, for clout, to go and be able to brag about in a high fence property where someone had been feeding it maize for the last 7 days and they knew exactly where it would be. There's no pursuit in that. There's no effort. There's no reward. Has to be the product of an expense in effort. And I think that's a null equation there. There's no expense in effort to do that. Therefore, the reward is superficial at best.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's important to clarify that all high fence properties are small enough that the deer are in predictable areas, have predictable patterns. Not all high fence properties involve the feeding of animals. I know of a lot of high fence properties where they're basically free range. They do whatever they want. They don't get fed. They just survive or they die. And I know of free range properties that are like tens of thousands of acres, and that very much feel like you're hunting in state forest. You've just got a better chance. So it's not apples and apples and apples. It's there is a difference, but I do get your point. I do understand it, and this is something that I've personally had to walkthrough recently in that I've done two now. Well, the first one I did wasn't. I mean, we did a little bit of hunting, but I never got to pull the trigger because we got interrupted, and I didn't actually even know that we were going to be doing that until like 5 minutes before it happened. So I wasn't prepared. The second hunt I did in Water Valley in South Australia with Paul Convery, and that was very much going into it full knowledge that this is what's going to happen. But going back to what you said before about the challenge and the different metrics that you measure, for me personally, I got a lot out of that hunt on that high fence property because the challenge wasn't in the stalk for me. The challenge was in executing that kill the best, cleanest way I could. It was almost like it was like shooting, but you're shooting an animal, which is not hunting, but there's an overlap. And it's like, let's remove all of the variables that are involved in the hunt. So you don't have to worry about those. You're not measuring yourself up against those. So I wasn't measuring my stalk. I wasn't measuring, how good I was at glassing or reading sign or anything like that. All I was measuring was my skill with the rifle and my shot placement under a long range, difficult shot. And I'm happy to say, under a lot of pressure, I nailed it, and that felt awesome. And I felt like I achieved something in my hunting journey that, while it wasn't a hunt, and it probably wouldn't be fair to call it a hunt, it added to my hunting experience and my hunting knowledge and my hunting skill set. And in a really shallow sense, and I'm happy to be shallow sometimes when it serves the greater narrative of my life. But in a really shallow sense, it kind of gave me a little token, like a little bing, like that I can hold on to and be like, I nailed that shot. And then the next time I actually shot a deer, I absolutely bungled it. I felt I still dropped the deer, but I spined it and I felt terrible. And then we had to follow up with the next shot, and I felt bad about that.
So in those two instances, just to push on that a little bit, in those two instances, which one did you learn more from? The one that you bungled, or the one that you got to put in your cookie jar? Which one were you less likely to have a negative outcome on again in the future?
That's hard to say.
So I know that you and I have touched on this before in the past, and I think that for me, this speaks volumes to the mindset that I try and adopt with hunting. I want it to be hard. I want to struggle. Yeah. I want to hate myself every second of that because I want to see that I don't live up to an expectation that I have of myself, and I want to use that as fuel to do better each and every time. So for me, in those two instances that you were just describing, the lesson would be far greater in the failure than it would be in the success. Like, success for me is something, it's water off a duck's back. I really try not to live on those successes. I'll stand on that hill for just a minute second, and then I'll go straight down the other side of it. Because if you dwell on, we've all heard, I'm sure you would have had friends in high school, or at least gone to high school with people who, they were going to make the footy team and they were going to play for the AFL or the NRL or something like that. But then they did their knee. That's the peak of that person's life in a lot of instances. They will never again be as good as they once were. And I think that's the consequence of living in the shadow of your achievements, as opposed to striving to shed light in the darkness, which is what I'm always trying to do. I'm trying to go on those hunts, and I'm trying to suffer as much as I can so that I can better myself. And I motivate myself through that by hating myself for not living up to these expectations that I hold, because I'll never live up to them. Never. If I ever live up to them, I'm just going to quit. That's it.
Yeah, see, this is really interesting, because I know that we differ on this in this position, and I'm keen to flesh it out and going to get to the root of both of our positions, hopefully. For me, I find personally, and when we talk about growth, I think we're always talking about the personal styles of learning, the personal application of learning. It's not a one fit all for everyone. So this is me, what works for me. If I can find a lesson and I can find growth in almost any situation. Even when I feel like I've absolutely nailed something, which is very, very rare, I can still find something to take away from it, because I always want to be growing. I feel like if I'm not growing, I'm not static, I'm actually going backwards. And my loved ones around me depend on me growing for their sense of happiness and well-being. And also this is my life. This is my story, my narrative. And I want to grow. I want to feel happier. I want to be better. And so I try and find a situation, I try and find a learning opportunity in every single situation. And my experience is, if I come down too hard on myself, I rob myself of that insight, or that my lens kind of focuses down, and I spiral into that negative self-talk, and I start closing doors that otherwise I could have opened and peered in and had a little look and been like, oh, there's a lesson there. I kind of just get just a bit of a negative Nelly. I think I've experienced it recently. Literally, like, I've been sick for the last 2 days, and I said to my wife, Amy, so the thing I hate most about being sick is not the sickness itself. It's not the effect on my body. It's the effect on my mind. I find that I just get incredibly disheartened. The world starts kind of turning into shades of gray, and I find it difficult to motivate myself to do things. And I'm like a super optimistic person. Like, I see the light everywhere, and I walk around kind of like wearing my heart on my sleeve, and I'm happy to take all the hits in the world if for the sake of growth. But when I get sick, I get really melancholic and really disheartened. And so, while I understand your position, and I'm happy, and I agree in that I 100% want everything. Not everything. I value the grind. I want it to be hard. I want to feel like I've earned it. That's where the greatest learning opportunities are for me. If I go too hard, then I rob myself of learning. What do you think about that? Have you found something similar in your own journey where you've been too critical of yourself?
No, I don't think I can ever be too critical of myself, because I'm just a perpetual screw up, mate.
When do you get to the other side though? Then where's the silver lining? Where's the pot of gold? Where's the learning opportunity if you're always being? How about you tell me about the story about that red deer that you shot?
So that one is that's my favourite deer that I've ever shot, and people will absolutely laugh and crucify me over it. It was like a 2 in velvet. So absolutely nothing. Absolutely something that you wouldn't even own up to ever shooting.
A dud.
Now, yeah, a complete dud. Matter of fact, it was probably a bad thing to have shot it. The reason why that deer meant so much to me is that property is in the middle of the most inhospitable terrain that I've ever hunted in my life. Just thick with lantana. And lantana, 2 metres high, wall to wall. Occasionally you'd get a sight, like a laneway of 50 metres, but they would be so rare. Basically, you were never going to get a shot at a deer unless you just happened to be lucky enough to find one at the right time. So I hunted that property for 18 months. So the bloke who owned the property gave me and another bloke rights to hunt on it. As far as I'm aware, I was the only one that was up there. So the other bloke just never made it up there. I hunted that place for 18 months. Now, I'm mad about my fitness. Always wear a Garmin wristwatch that's got all my tracking metrics on it. So I used to keep track of how far I'd walked on there. So over 18 months, walked 174, sorry. I don't want to conflate it here. 174 kilometres on that place. Yeah, I don't want to talk myself up. 174 kilometres I walked on that place without even seeing a deer. Found a few tracks sometimes. Other times I'd find no tracks. Like at this stage, I was convinced that there just wasn't any deer there, but they'd all vanished. They were gone. Well, it was either that, they were either gone, or I was just that shit that I scared every deer off in a 4 kilometre radius. So they were my two options. There's, what else can you do? So I had my brother up there with me this weekend, and he is kind of similar to me, but very, very different. Probably a little bit more like you than me. Definitely not quite as hard on himself as what I am on myself. And so we hunted all day on Friday afternoon. Then we hunted Saturday morning. About lunchtime came, hadn't seen a damn thing. So he had packed up and he said, look, I'm going to go back. He had his son with him and that. My son. He took him back to spend a night with his grandmother. He said, look, we're going to go back. Do you want to come back? And I said, no, I'm going to stay out here one more night. Just one more night. Like, I wanted to try a few different things. I felt like I was honing in on my bushcraft skills and on my stalking skills that in this country that I might stand a decent chance if I could just set myself up right. So I went and perched up about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, went perched up on the corner of an opening in some heavy brush and just sat there. And I sat there for 45 minutes just getting my ass chewed out by mosquitoes. And the whole time thinking, I'm going to see one. And then I thought, bugger it, no. It's starting to get dark. I'm not going to see one, so I'll start walking back. I thought, no, I won't walk back. I'll take the long way back here. I've got a headlamp with me in my backpack. If I find anything, I can walk back in the dark. Bugger me dead, I mustn't have walked like 800 metres down off this track, rounded this corner. But before I'd rounded it, I just caught it this little whiff, just a whiff of the deer straight away. Stag.
I love getting that smell.
I knew it was a stag. And before I'd seen him. So I knew that there was something there, or at least there had been something there before I'd seen him. And come around the side of this big tree, shouldered. I had my old, shameless plug for my old rifle collection. I had my old 1945 Car 98, rechambered in 7.62 NATO. So coolest thing ever. It's a German rifle that was then given to the Israelis post-war. So I've got my Nazi Jew rifle there slung over my shoulder.
Yeah.
And as I've come around, sighted this stag, shouldered it up, took a shot, and thought, there's no way I hit that. Like, it was just a split-second snapshot like that. Seen him run off into the scrub and thought, bugger it, I've missed it. I'm not going to get a chance to chase after it now. That's far too thick, that scrub. I just won't get it. I thought, bugger it, I'll just go and have a quick look. Sure enough, I walk about, it must have been like a 20-metre shot, walk into the scrub where I thought that I'd seen him. It must have been two. The one that I shot at was dead as a doornail within 90 seconds.
Wow.
When I had a look at him, it was a perfect heart shot.
Yeah.
I could not replicate it again. And don't make no mistakes, I'm not a terrific marksman. This was just the perfect confluence of event. And I hit this thing. Obviously, it was his mate that ran off.
Yeah.
And I'm not an emotional person, but if I wasn't on the verge of tears, I'd be lying.
Yeah.
I had a look at him. I spent probably 5 minutes just kneeling down beside him, looking at him.
Yeah.
And it wasn't so much that I'd got this deer. It was this sense of that hard work paying off, enjoying that for a moment, and then thinking, okay, next thing, let's struggle, let's cut this thing up, and let's start packing it back to the camp. It was about 3 kilometres away.
Wow. Did you feel that sense of elation and wholesomeness because you didn't cheat? Like, did you feel tempted over that period of time to cheat, to bring out a thermal? Did you have access to a thermal? Did you use game cameras, or were you doing calls, or did you feel tempted to do those things?
No, just because I'm useless. Like that just wouldn't have crossed my mind.
You were just like, I'm just going to just pursue this relentlessly.
Yeah. The thought, multiple times I had the thought that, I need to move on to a different property. I'm never going to get anything out of here. What's the point in even trying?
Yeah.
But I'd seen enough signs to know that there was something there. And for me, what it boiled down to was that, right, this country's super, super hard. You're not going to get a clear shot of the deer here. If you get one here, it's going to be because you have stalked this thing without even knowing that it's there. You've stalked it so effectively that it hasn't heard you, that it hasn't seen you, and that it hasn't smelt you. And that is so hard to do when you can't see more than, if you got on a good roadway through that property, maybe you could see 150 metres, but that was so sparse. Most of the country that you're going through is way overgrown tracks. So I knew that if I got one, it was going to be well and truly earned. And it was the hard work, the suffering for me that I wanted. That's what I needed to fulfill me in that hunt.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I mean, I don't know about you, but I do have that negative self-talk that I use in a positive way sometimes when I'm out hunting, and specifically it's about that confluence of events, that trying to get the trifecta. It's like trying to see the animal and smell the animal before it sees or smells you or hears you. And you can't help but second guess as you spend a long amount of time in a single spot, in a single like event, and you've walked like 3 or 4K, and you've been like, that 3 or 4K behind me is completely stuffed. Like you hear that all the time. They're like, absolutely stuffed. I've completely, blown out that area. It's my sense all through it. Anything would have completely gone. And I wonder whether that's always true, like whether that is always the case. And I wonder, I have this kind of little like fantasy in my mind that maybe is designed. It's like this self kind of fantasy to keep my spirits up, that whenever I'm walking through a thick area like that Lantana area, that's like they're just like 10 meters off, just bedded down, and I just can't see them. And I walk straight past them, and they know to like just stay put, and you'll be fine. And I kind of envision all of these deer just doing that. And I don't know whether that's true or not, but that is some of my kind of self-talk that helps motivate me to kind of keep going. I mean, but I have learned over the years to make calls on spots and be like, okay, you've hit, like, I'm all for relentless pursuing an objective and putting in the time, but it's like after 2 years of not seeing anything in this spot, I'm like, there's better spots, Chris. Like, you can still be relentless. You can still be a perfectionist. You can still work hard. Just do it in a smart way. Is that something? And I kind of just burn that.
No, that's okay. I think that it comes down to why you're hunting in the first place. And for me, the pursuit of the animal is secondary to the pursuit of personal growth that comes through the suffering.
Yeah.
So, I think that's why that I don't place importance, and maybe this will change, but at this particular point in my life, I don't place importance on a head. Like I'm not super proud about, how big a head I've shot or anything like that. For me, the stories of how I shot it is far more fascinating. I shot my first fallow stag this year down around Glen Innes that had been organised. It was a mate of a mate who he couldn't make the trip and called me up and said, "Hey, look, do you want to go down there?" So, drove down. I'm up in the Lockyer Valley up in Queensland. So, drove down to Glen Innes, to a place that I'm not familiar with, to meet people who I'd never met before, to go out and stay in the middle of the arse end of nowhere with a bunch of rifles. So. Yeah.
I do that all the time.
What's dangerous or perilous about that? Yeah, exactly. But it's such an uncomfortable thing to do. It's a 4-hour trek down there for me, which is, nothing to a lot of people on that. But it's more, it put me outside my comfort zone, and therefore there was growth to be found. So when I did finally shoot this stag after missing 2 shots on a larger stag, it's just stupid me. I'd been hunting this thick country for so long that we found this stag. There was a perfectly good rock sitting here beside me that I could have laid down on and used as a rest. And my dumb ass tried to shoot this thing offhand at about 100 metres open sight with this old rifle. And, of course, balls it. And the bloke had just been telling me how flighty these fallow stags are. So I shot the first shot, and this stag just turned around and looked at me. Well, he stood there and looked at me after this first shot. And then I took the second shot and missed that as well. Whoa. And old mate was looking at me afterwards. He goes, "I've never seen that before in my life." I said, "I thought you were full of shit, mate. Like, you tell me how flighty these things are, and I've just taken 2 shots at it."
He was like, "Take me."
Yeah, and only then it was semi-motivated to get out of the area. But after that, we walked for a fair bit more, found this other stag, spent... I'd be lying if I said an exact figure. Let's call it 20 minutes, stalking from one hillside up to the other hillside while he stood back and watched the stag. Got up to within 15 metres of it and shot it in the heart, dead straight again, like that last one I was telling you about. There was so much thrill in that stalk. I really enjoyed all of that. And he's not a terrible head for my first fallow stag and all that, but then... we packed him up. I gave old mate my rifle and threw him in. I had this. I didn't have a big backpack with me or anything, so I just had a nice little. What are they called? It's like a 511 backpack. I can't remember the name of them, but it's just like a normal school bag backpack.
Yeah. Like a small
And
tactical
I
one.
stuffed. Yeah, exactly. And I stuffed. We weighed him back when I got back there. I can't remember. It was 25, 30 kilos worth of meat, limbs, everything like that in the back of this pack. Had no back brace in it. Had no frame.
Yeah.
Had no waist belt in it or anything. Just had a chest strap.
Yeah.
So carted this thing back. Mate, I had the worst headache. This thing just cut right into my shoulders. Had this massive tension. The whole time, old mate's going, we can split him up. We can split him up. I said, no. I shot it. I'll cart it back. Granted, when I first agreed to this, I said to him, how far is this, mate?
Yeah.
Back to camp. And he goes, it's about 2.5 Ks. I said, yeah, bro, I can hump that back 2.5 Ks.
Yeah.
Turns out when we got back to there and I checked my little wristwatch there, we'd actually done 19 kilometres for the morning. So I must have hiked that thing back closer to about 8 or 9 Ks.
Wow.
I had to stop 3 times and just rest it up on a stump and just give my shoulder just a little bit of a break. And I got back there and I was absolutely elated because I was in so much pain.
Yeah.
And like for me, I was excited about having shot it. I was excited about been able to kick that head with the nice palms on it and everything. Yeah. But I was so excited that I carried that bastard that whole way back in absolute agony.
That sounds like the first deer that I shot was a fallow spiker up in the high country with my brother. And I've told this story a few times. I'm not sure if I've told it on this channel or not, but I'll tell it to you now because it's very similar. We've been hunting this system for 2 days, and basically the way that this system works is you kind of contour around the face down these spurs, and then you basically go about I'm going to say about 6K down the mountain. And then you kind of contour back up again, and you come through this area called Samba City, which is about halfway up the spur, where it's like this light glen. Like it's beautiful. It's just kind of everything kind of opens up. There's a bit of water in there, and it's just paradise. It's absolutely glorious. And we call it Samba City because it's just generally full of samba and fallow. And the idea is that you kind of cast your luck on the rest of the system for the morning, and then when you like luck out, you're like, all right, we're going off to Samba City and we're going to get a deer today. And we've been hunting for 2 days, and I hadn't shot a deer, and my brother was being really generous with giving up his time and helping me learn and teaching me all these different things. Anyway, we came up to this spot in Samba City, and my brother's like, all right, we're about to crest this little rocky face here, and we're going to get into Samba City. He's like, you will see a deer, you will shoot it, and you will take it down, and it's all going to happen very, very quickly. So listen to what I say. And I'm like, okay. He's like, we're gonna go from like a crawl to like inches. We're moving in like inches, and so we did that, and we moved into this little section. And he's like, can you smell that? I'm like, what? And he's like, that's deer. And I'm like, I don't know what deer smells like. I'm like, oh, yeah, all right, I'll take your word for it. And he's like, okay, this is what you're gonna do. You're gonna sit here in front of this tree, block your silhouette, pull up your rifle, and I'm gonna do some calls. And so he did that. And like I chambered around, and then within like seconds of him calling, you start to hear the hoofs, and this group of fallow came through. And my brother was like, all right, just wait, don't shoot the first one you see. And it was like, just as he said that, I was like, bang. Literally the second that I had one broadside, I shot. And it was terrible because there was this really nice buck in that group, and like literally it was like maybe 10 deer just went and just split. And I was so just pumped with adrenaline and in awe and stupefied that I didn't even like chamber another round. I could have shot 2 or 3 deer, but I just blinded. And anyway, we went over and we checked it out, and it was this spiker. Hey, it wouldn't be more than like 50 kilos, like max kind of thing. So not a huge deer. But like I just loved him. And I was so excited and happy, and we'd done a fair bit of work to get to him, like, hunting all morning. And then my brother's like, all right, like, let's pack him up and take him back to camp. And like, I'm like, okay, well, how do we do that? And he's like, we're going to do a backpack. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what a backpack is. And anyway, so for those who don't know what a backpack is and you're listening to this, essentially you make incisions between the Achilles in the back legs and the front legs, and you basically push the legs through each other to make like a sling almost, and then you kind of wear those hoops around you like a backpack. But the legs kept falling out, and so we end up getting some rope and tying it between those Achilles. And it was, I had that rope pushing into my back, like taut into my back. And we had about 4K back to camp, but about 800 meters elevation. And oh man, did it suck. Like it was one of the hardest, most brutal carryouts I've ever done. And I think I've done harder. In fact, I know I've done harder, but in my mind, that was the hardest one. And it was because I'd never done it before. And I'm putting on this brave face and I'm talking to my brother and I'm like, and how much longer do we get? Like, it was like I'd walked 10 meters and I'm like, this sucks. Like, I'm not going to be able to do this. And I was like, but I'm putting on a brave face and I'm sweating, just absolutely drenched in sweat. And we get up a hill and I'd be like, are we close? And my brother would be like, yeah, we're really close, Chris, just over this next rise. And it was like totally lying. And then I think I literally collapsed at one point and he's like, Chris, do you want me to take it? And no, I don't even think he asked. You know what? I don't even think he asked. What I'm probably remembering more so is the thought of just give it to him. Just cut it up. Like you don't need to do this. And then I don't know where it came from. I don't know what this voice was, but this thought came to my head of no, like suck it up. This is your moment to learn. This is your moment to grow. You won't have earned this unless you do it. And you won't have respected this animal unless you do it. Like this is your kill. Man up. Not man up. That's it. I don't want to be. You know what I mean. Take responsibility.
I think you can say that one.
Take this responsibility and do it. And I did. And I got it all the way back to camp and threw it down on the ground. And like you, it was just this moment of like elation, and it was this shared celebration and this kind of. It's almost like at that point, my relationship with my brother was deepened like 20-fold. It was just like, everything became that much more intense. This level of trust was that much deeper to the point where in terms of my hunting journey and experience, I am the most accountable to him. And he has I give him so much freedom to call me on my BS, especially with YouTube stuff, to say, Chris, you're being an absolute idiot. Your head's getting too big. You don't know what you're talking about. You haven't thought that through. What you did was not representative of what actually happened. He has 100% right to do that and say that, and I've given him that permission.
That's interesting. So, we started this conversation talking about ethics and about the morality of taking a life and whether or not that can be acceptable.
Yeah.
Even then when you mentioned about manning up, how that's now not a politically correct way of looking at it. I push back on all of those things because I think that it 100% is, and I think it's symptomatic of it's an oversimplified way of saying, or to say that we've neutered men, or at least what we can potentially be. But it's interesting you talk about your brother doing that, and I think it ties in with my point here. There was ages ago. So I'd first seen a couple of your YouTube videos and that, right? I can't even, the YouTube algorithm works in mysterious ways. 1 minute I'm watching hunting videos. The next minute I'm watching a tutorial on
pulling at the puppet string.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. How much does that cost an hour?
Yeah, exactly.
So I'd seen a couple of them, a couple of your videos, and they were specifically to do with hunting in state forests in New South Wales, because it's not something I've got no experience with.
Yeah.
But something I'm sort of looking at getting my license doing. But interestingly, you remember when that, and this is going to be a little bit of a difficult one to chat about, but I want to go here.
Let's go. I'm all for difficult.
Okay, remember when the school shooting was on?
Yes.
I happened to be driving home from volleyball one night. I played a late game or something like that, so it was like, must have been like 8, 9 o'clock at night, and I get a notification on your channel. So there was a video. Occasionally, I'm really,
I hope this is what you.
Yes, it is.
Wow,
it is.
Okay.
So I I have this constant need to not feel connected, but I like things happening in the background. So I prefer to have a YouTube video playing in the car, just sitting off to the side, even with the screen turned off, and just listening to it. It makes me feel like I'm not alone, I guess. Probably should speak to somebody about that. So I get a notification that you'd uploaded this video, and it was specifically, I can't remember the title of it, but I knew that it was something to do with this school shooting. So I switched it on, and I was listening to it, and you were talking about your views on the school shooting. And basically it was a real-time rant about gun laws. And I thought, oh, this will be interesting. Yeah. So a hunter, I wonder which take is this going to be, because I'm assuming that it's going to be a pro-gun, a take on things and everything. So I turn it on and I start listening to it. And you're basically talking about the fact that you've got children that, you can sympathise. And at one point you're breaking down in tears. You're quite emotional and worked up about it. I thought it was interesting. Like, I don't know that I agreed with all of the things, but I'm going to entertain your opinions at least. Halfway through it, all of a sudden it stopped playing. Now that you said that, was that your brother? And also, can we talk about it? Because you'd uploaded it obviously with the intent of voicing your opinion with some kind of, I guess, wanting to affect some kind of change, given the fact that you've got a platform there. But at the same time, what made you pull it? If you felt so strongly in the first place to record it and upload it, and you felt like that was a good representation or at least a good image to portray, because let's be honest, you speak about hunters or you speak for hunters, whether you like it or not. Anybody in the public face is going to, if they're at least tangentially involved in that industry. So you felt strongly enough to put it out, but then also felt strongly enough to pull it. So can we talk about that? Can we explore it?
We can definitely, man. This is a conversation I never thought I'd have. This is awesome. This is awesome.
It's the joys of the internet, Chris.
I'm actually really glad that that this has come up. So first of all, for context for people listening, what we're talking about is the Texas shootings. When was it? It was this year, 2022, and it was tragic. I don't know how many people were killed and injured, but it was I think it was 20 or something. It was just insane, and it was everywhere, and it was just another shooting in a school in America, and the governor of Texas basically, again, go do your research if you want the truth. This is just what I remember. The governor basically came out and said, the answer is that we just need more security guards. That's the answer to this issue. And I just had a really strong objection to that. And like you said, I have kids, and I was deeply affected by it because I just saw my kids' faces in that school. And I don't want to get emotional about it now, and I'll try not to, so I remain have clarity of thought. But I just saw my kids' faces in that school, and I saw them get shot, and I had a really strong and visceral reaction, and I wanted to share that emotion, and I wanted to share that thought and some musings that I've done about it around gun control. And specifically that when it comes to the lives of our children, I would rather have no guns and have all our kids safe than have guns and them not be safe. That was the main thought. I basically said I would give up hunting as much as I love it, as much as I feel it's positive and for me and I feel connected. I would give it up if it meant my kids were safe. That was a long story short. I posted it, and then I think it was up for like 5 minutes, maybe.
It wasn't long.
It was not.
I think I got about 5 minutes into it.
Yeah, I think it was up for like 5 minutes, and then I pulled it down, and it had nothing to do with anyone else. I didn't tell anyone that I was going to do it. It wasn't spur of the moment in that I'd collected some of these thoughts in the 24 hours since it happened, and I often go out for a walk in the morning, and I have like a cup of tea with me or a coffee or something, and I just walk and I think. And sometimes if you watch the YouTube channel, you'll see some of those musings that I record. I literally record them as I'm walking, and I'm kind of stream of consciousness kind of thing coming out. But I worried. The reason why I took it down, I think, and I'm happy for you to push back against this and try and flesh it out even more, because I'm only thinking about this on the spot. I think I worried that people would misinterpret it. I think I worried that people would mistake my emotion and authenticity for theatrics, and I didn't want to demean what had happened, and I didn't want to incite. I wanted to incite anger and frustration and almost rage, because I think what is happening in America with gun laws is insanity, literally insanity. I can't reconcile how a country can allow their children and their citizens to get killed when for political maneuvering and power and profit. I think the American people need to rise up against that and just say enough's enough, and put pressure on their senators, on their local politicians, their governors, to stop this. And I understand the gun lobby in America is insanely powerful. I get that, but it's a democracy, so the power is with the people. So the people need to stand up. And I think I just worried that people would take it the wrong way. And I thought more about it as well, and thought, is this hunting related? And the answer was no, it's not hunting related. I mean, it's shooting related and it's firearm related, but is it specifically related to hunting? And it's like, well, no, it's not. And
can you separate the two though?
I mean, I thought so. I mean, that's why I, like you said, I understand that by having a voice and by putting my voice out there, and the louder my voice gets, the more people watch videos and listen to podcasts and stuff, the more responsibility I have. I understand that very much so, and I'm trying to be very careful about making sure that what I say is truthful and authentic and motivates positivity.
Can that be true though? So if it's specifically curated speech that you're putting out though, can that be authentic? Because the reality is, this is why I love podcasts. You know, I listen to them constantly while I'm at work, driving in between jobs, and that is because I crave the authenticity. I want to see someone stumble through a thought process, because the reality is, in face-to-face conversation, I don't have perfectly formed thoughts. Everything that I'm talking about here tonight is a half-assed attempt at me trying to verbalize my mind.
Yeah.
And that's the way that life is. So things like that, even if it was, you know, I don't want to say let's call it. How about I would call it an emotional reaction, more so than a rational one, by putting out a video like that. But it's also authentic. I think that it's a fine line between being conscious of I think going back to it, the burden of responsibility that you've got with a public platform, but also being aware that that same burden is to also be authentic and realistic. Yeah. And I feel like that's what's craving in all of this social media, modern social media, is that we're not the authentic representation of ourselves.
I agree. And look, and I think you've highlighted a few things. Firstly, that there is a time and a place and a context for different types of content, and different types of people view different types of content in different ways and respond in different ways and expect different things from them. So I agree that if this podcast had existed at that time, I probably would have rather have a conversation like this about it, and had more of a back and forth discussion with a human being that can temper as well as excite different parts of that conversation. My worry was that in being really raw and authentic, that some people would view that as showmanship and misinterpret my intent, and that would alienate people from to me that otherwise I could reach and help and speak to and grow together with, if I held that back. So a lot of what YouTube is is that dance between authenticity and curated thought, about pushing the boundaries and about being clever about holding things back. And it is real, yes, but it is real and it is it's curated real. That's probably a better way of looking about it. And I think anyone who thinks that YouTube isn't that is lying, because we have cuts at certain points. There's a narrative. There's a sense of dynamics. There's a pacing and a tempo. Like I can use audio to make you feel a certain way subtly. And what I try and do with my content is use all of those elements that aren't real to make it feel real, to make it feel more real for you in the spirit of what actually happened. Because if I don't use those things, you won't get the full experience of what I experienced, because I'm pushing it through a camera. And it's so we kind of use these elements. And I guess my fear was like, I don't want to alienate people. I don't want to go too heavy. And then a lot of people go, oh my gosh, Chris, like what? That like was not expecting that, was not ready for that. And I'm sure, and I feel like I have a good idea of the kind of audience that watches my stuff, at least, that a lot of people would have responded really positively to that. Whether like yourself, whether they would have agreed or not, they would have been like, oh yeah, no, this is unacceptable. What's happening in America is unacceptable. We need to rise up. We need to rally our American friends, like not just like American friends as in like, country, like literally friends that we have in America, to take action. And then some people would have been like, oh my God, Chris, really? Are you getting political? Or really? Like, are you really feeling that way? Oh, wow. You pulled the whole your kids card. Like, and I want to reach all those people as much as possible. And I know full well that I can't reach 100%, but I can be clever about moderating and managing my own, the betrayal of what I do and betrayal of who I am and my emotions, so that I can get maximum effectiveness, maximum connection. We all do that with relationships, right? Even right now, we're doing it. You're doing it with me. I'm doing it with you. We are managing the perception the other person has of us in order to deepen and enrich in our relationships. We could start talking about all sorts. We could pull all sorts of skeletons out. We're not.
That's interesting, though. Can I push back on that?
Of course. That's what we're here for.
Because that's something that I would disagree with, because and granted, I'm incredibly fallible human. Like I'm constantly screwing.
Do you know what though,
existence.
Carl? But that statement is you managing. What you're saying right now about the declaration of your fallibility is you're trying to manage how I view you. It's exactly what we're talking about.
What I would say about that, though, is not that I'm trying to manage your expectation. I'm managing my own in real time. So as I say something like that, that's so something like that is not for not for your benefit. That's for my benefit as I'm working through something. So it prefaces it and it puts me in the right mindset for myself to be able to unpack my thought. But the reality is, I don't have. And I guess this is just my worldview on it. I don't have a dog in the fight, in the sense that I'm not making a conscious effort there to make you like me or for an audience, or there's no, it's not an act. Like that's absolutely far from my mind. What I'm here is I want to discuss the hard things. I want to have the in-depth conversations, because I'm a selfish son of a bitch and I want to grow from this conversation. I really don't care about your perception or the audience's perception from me.
A well of learning for you. Our relationship is just the playground.
Yeah.
Look,
exactly. Think of me as like an information parasite.
Look, I agree that is certainly an element and a dynamic that's at play. But at the same time, I think there's levels of it, right? So there is a high intellectual level in which you can completely separate yourself from everyone else and just do your thing and learn objectively. But then you go down from that kind of conscious level into the unconscious, and you're doing things even right now with your posture, the way that you're looking at me, eye contact, the way you're holding your hands, how much you're sweating, your heart rate, all of these things are indicators that you're doing to tell me how you feel, to manage our conversation and manage our relationship and manage everything that we're doing right now. And then even at a deeper level than that, there's that you're wearing clothes. Like I'm wearing clothes. There are social norms that we're obeying so that we can.
I felt like I should have put something on. Like we can do another one after hours if you want.
There isn't, for those who are watching, there is an after podcast. I've been thinking about the after podcast for a while now, where we just get raucous.
Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, I agree. And look, to pull it back into hunting, or even back into that conversation, I was trying to manage some of those elements, and I felt like that the way that it ended up being packaged, I worried that it would do more harm than good, and that's the reason why I pulled it down. Because I hope that you yourself and anyone listening know that I'm the same. I want to have the hard conversations. I want to grow. I want to learn as a hunter, as a human being, as a killer, as a sportsman. You insert whatever word you want into what we do. And part of that is managing how I come across. I try to be as authentic as I can, but also working within the boundaries of people's expectations and the way people behave. I'd love just to be a complete anarchist and chaotician and just do whatever I wanted. Man, I would love that. But I don't think I would be effective as a human being, at least to other people.
Can it be something that changes and morphs as society or the specific ecosystems like the hunting world, as they grow and as they sort of explore other things that were otherwise taboo? So we started this conversation talking about the morality of, is it okay to enjoy killing? In that same sense, you could say that is a poor optic in which to have a conversation for the outside world. You know, you imagine if you and I went on a podcast with Peter or Greenpeace or something like that, and we said, no, we actually both enjoy shooting deer. Like, I love the power of taking an animal's life. You'd be labelled a sociopath and run off. But does that then mean that that's not a conversation that needs to be had, or that there's something that there's benefit to having in open discourse?
Yeah. I think we've spoken about this before, in that I have this dualistic worldview where I see absolute truth over on this side, and it's like right and wrong, yes and no, 5.1 and 5.2 kind of stuff. And then on the other side, I see the way the world interacts in reality, and I live in the middle. I used to live far more on the abstract, absolute truth side. And just because I was young and naive, actually, in some regards, there's a lot of wisdom in living that way because it's the truth and everyone should live that way. But the reality is that doesn't always marry to real life. And so I live in the middle ground where the Venn diagram where those spheres intersect. And I try as much to draw from the truth and live the truth. But then I live in context, and I bend and I shift and I move based on where I'm at, so I can be effective. So for me, it's like, yes, those conversations need to happen because they're right, or because they're the truth, or because they're beneficial, or because they're healthy, or insert whatever you want into that equation. And so the question that drives my actions and motivations, and whether I do it or not, is how can I have that conversation and get the result? Because for me, the conversation by itself is not enough. The conversation, just to have a conversation with the Greens and say, guess what? There is something fundamentally human about killing. There's something important about killing. There's something about life and death and having control over that process that's important for human beings to master and use and understand. And animals should die for our benefit. That's an important conversation to have. But just having that conversation and then not getting the learning on the other side, not getting the understanding, not then getting the behavior that then seeks to change certain dynamics and laws that would otherwise facilitate that truth. If that doesn't happen, then you haven't, in my mind, you haven't had the conversation in the right way, and you've actually done more damage than good. It's tricky.
It is. I don't know. So we differ very slightly in our worldview. So I'm glad that you corrected that comment about being naive about it, because I sincerely hope that I'm not as naive as I once was. But I take a very, what would you say, a very biological, not black and white with shades of grey, but a very absolutist way in judging, or at least adopting my sense of morality and virtues, in the sense that I believe that underlying everything there is an objective truth. And I know you and I spoke about this before, about this concept of objective truth. And for some people, that's in a greater being, in a deity of X, Y, Z, pick your choice. But for me, it's not so much that. It's just that there is an underlying right or wrong in everything that will be done. And I would prefer myself to err on the side of trying to live up to that expectation of right and wrong, rather than catering to some kind of catering to a societal context.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's incorrect. And there's something that irks me at a fundamental level about that, about bending for something that I know is wrong.
Yeah.
I can't do that. I struggle with that badly.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that. I completely get that. I mean, what helps me justify it? Not justify, that's the wrong word. The reason why I play in that grey space where there's societal norms and there's a cultural zeitgeist that needs to be managed and all that kind of stuff, is because there are tiers to right and wrong, and there are levels. And so I'm shooting for the big ones. I'm shooting for the big moral values, and to get those right, which just sounds strange and abstract, but rather than just trying to fight every single little truth battle. And so if I need to play in the grey space so that we achieve some of those bigger things, then I will. Like, for instance, here's a good example. It's like we can spend all the time in the world arguing about whether Kit Kats should be $2.50, right? And you're telling me that the production value on Kit Kat is 10 cents and the company ethically should make a 50% margin. Therefore, it should be X amount of dollars on the shelf. And we can fight black and blue. We can campaign to Parliament. We can go write letters to Cadbury or whoever makes Kit Kat and fight over it till we're blue in the face and spend our whole lives doing that. Or we could spend our efforts having a discussion within NATO about whether two countries should go at war when there's millions of lives at stake. And so then they're both true. They're both like there's a moral absolute value to both those things that are in some senses equal, but then in others not.
So in that example that you've given, though, would it not be true that you're talking about two sides of the same coin, in the sense that if we think about everything that we are exposed to as our circle of concern, and then everything that we can actually put our hands on and affect as our circle of influence, think of like two bullseyes. Mm-hmm. We're still living in that circle of concern, because we could sit here and talk about the morality of wars and whether or not they're necessary. Same as I guess I could even make the argument that we could do the same about the school shooting, in the sense that it's something that's a concern, most certainly. But can we actually change that? Mm. Even with your platform, is that actually going to make any difference? Yeah. So are we not talking about the exact same thing with the Kit Kats all over again?
Well, maybe it's turtles all the way down. It's hard. It's tricky, and I can hear the objections from some people saying, for even like if we put this back into the hunting sphere, like at the moment within South Australia, there's some movements going around basically banning bow hunting. And some people will say, if you don't voice your objection, then you can't expect things to change. And so if you really like Kit Kats and you don't think they should be $2.50, then you need to speak up. And that's definitely an element that whether you think you can make a change or not, if you want the change, you have to try. So that's definitely a factor. At the same time, a person can only do so much. A person can only be effective in so many realms. A person has only so much time. And so in some ways, just purely because of the physiological restraints on someone, you have to pick your battles. And you need to, it's like, I liken it as well to being a father in that, and I think we've even spoken about this, in that if I'm in a good place, if I look after myself and I look after my marriage, then I will be a good father. It sets the foundation for me then to have time and effort and energy. Like my boys today, I spent yesterday afternoon with them in the spa at their grandparents' house, and then this afternoon with them in the spa at and I'm just stuffed. I'm like, oh, I'm so stuffed. And we get home, and the first thing that Eli says is, "Hey, Dad, do you want to go out and kick the footy?" And it's like 33 degrees outside. There's no shade, and I was just like, yes, I do.
Yeah.
And we went out and kicked the footy for
Yeah.
like an hour, because of the foundation that I've been setting in getting myself in a good place. And the same thing is true with all these things. Is you can fight for every single bit of absolute truth you want, but if you're not spending the time doing it in the important things, in the important areas, then you won't have that emotional capacity or time or effort or energy to fight those other battles.
100%. I think that when you said before, we're speaking about the concept of negative self-speak and things like that, and basically perpetual failure being a driver for me. It's very easy to adopt a nihilistic worldview if you take that in isolation of growth, or at least take that in isolation of a larger picture. So I think being able to conceptualize the circle of concern, but also being able to hone in on that circle of influence.
Yeah.
You're 100% right that that's what makes you a better person. You know, I've often said myself that in order for our children to benefit, my relationship with my wife has to be paramount.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that has to be. We have to be so selfish in the sense that we take care of each other. Because if the focus is switched and it's just on the child, well, now the foundation, the stability that is that household, our marriage, falls apart.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's triaging things that you can actually influence, but then also still being able to look at the larger picture of potential benefits.
Yeah. No, so good. So good. Well, Carl, let me finish with a question that requires a yes or no answer. As difficult as that,
Love it.
That might be for you. I'm going to go right back to the start. Yes or no, can we have our ethics and eat them too?
Yes.
Nice. Thanks, mate, for coming on. I appreciate it.
No, not a problem. Thanks very much for having me, Chris.
And that's it. That's a wrap on my conversation with Kyal Grant. Look, thank you for getting to the end of this podcast. I appreciate it. I appreciate your attention. Thank you for listening to Kyal's perspective. It's definitely unique and different. And I think there's value in diversity. It kind of opens up new ideas, and you might not agree with them all, but if it gets the cogs turning and gets you thinking, there's always value and wisdom to mine out of those conversations. And look, it was good for me to be kind of put on the spot as well to talk about something that I felt uncomfortable with, that I then had to unpack. So that's so much of what this podcast is about, is having real, honest conversations. And I encourage you, if you are interested in having real, honest conversations with other hunters, check out the Australian Hunters Club, australianhunters.com.au. It's a fantastic way to connect with other hunters, grow and develop, gain access to property, potentially win a free guided hunt, or go on hunts with other members. It's a great place to grow. Anyway, thanks so much for watching or for listening, and hopefully I see you in another podcast or video soon.